1. I recall getting my parents' permission to order the LEGO Star Wars Republic fighter tank, set number 7679, for my good grades sometime in fall 2008. Meaning, I would have been about 12 years old around this time. I was a huge Star Wars kid around this time, really into the expanded universe games and comics, and watched the Clone Wars TV show. I vividly recall sitting with my parents at the counter and having them show me how to order things online by inputting a credit card number and address for the product to be delivered to. In the week or two that followed, I largely forgot about having ordered the set for myself, largely because I had actually got myself suspended for a week for retaliating against a school bully who was the son of one of the office secretaries at the school. But that's a story for another day. My parents surprisingly were on my side. They had known that I was getting bullied through middle school, and had spoke with the teacher that had witnessed it, and didn't impose any further consequences on me. But nevertheless, I was stuck at home for the week, with my dad picking up my homework from my teachers for the duration. On Monday, there was a knock on the door at around 10 a.m. The mailman was dropping off my LEGO set. I had completely forgotten about it. Even though I wasn't in trouble with my parents, I still felt somewhat guilty that I was getting a new toy while I was being suspended from school. I know that doesn't make a lot of sense given the reason I was suspended, but I was a bit of a spineless kid and would end up feeling bad for things that I, in retrospect, was completely justified in doing. So I took the set out of his brown shipping box and put the set, still in the brightly colored printed official LEGO box, in the back of my closet. On Tuesday, my father had returned home with all of my coursework from the previous day, and I, still feeling guilty for retaliating against that bully, decided to commit myself to doing it. I had woken up at 7 a.m., and by 10 a.m., I was on a roll and had nearly finished for the day, assuming that I could come close to finishing 7 hours of work in about 3. Though I think that just bespeaks the terrible quality of public education here in the USA. At 10:13, there was a digital clock on my desk. There was a knock on the door. As the title suggests, it was the mailman dropping off a brown package. I didn't catch him, but I saw him getting back into his truck. Curious, I took the package inside and opened it, only to find another copy of the same set. This sent a shiver down my spine. Not only did I feel even more guilty and undeserving, but now I felt as though somehow I might have ordered multiples of the set, and that I would now be on my parents' bad side because of this mix-up. I recall trying to remember if I had input an 11 instead of a 1 into the product quantity field when ordering, and thinking to myself how I had then racked up around $660 on my parents' credit card. If that were the case. Something that they would surely be livid about once they found out. Then there would be no escape from adults. They would be mad at me both at home and when I went to school. Though once again I was a pretty spineless kid who got anxious about weird things. Hence I hid this second one too. On Wednesday, the same thing happened. Once more I was in line of sight with the clock, and it was exactly 10:13 when the doorbell rang. I somehow knew what it was, and I ran to the door. It was the same mailman who had left the same package in the exact same spot. This time I tried to run after him and ask him what was wrong. Being a somewhat timid kid, I don't think I yelled loud enough for him to hear me over the sound of the mail truck idling. It was slightly raining that day and pretty cold, so I didn't want to run after him. So I retrieved the package and, like the first 2 sets, hid it in my room. I vividly recall taking the 3 boxes out and examining them, shaking them, confirming that I did indeed have 3 copies of the same set. On Thursday, I decided I would be ready for the mailman. It was even colder than it was yesterday, with strong winds and rain falling outside, so I got into my warmest winter gear and about 10:05 went outside on the porch. Sure enough, a few minutes later I saw the mail truck making its way down my block. When the mailman came to our house carrying a good-sized brown box, I stood up and said, "Excuse me," to the man. He looked my way briefly, but didn't even stop walking. He looked like the most boring and unassuming man I had ever seen. Salt and pepper hair, maybe mid-50s, with a slight pot belly exposed by his tucked-in and soaking wet postman's uniform. When he left the package in the same spot and started to head away from the house, I ran after him and grabbed his hand, trying to get his attention, but he didn't notice me. On Friday, I would try a similar thing. This is probably the weirdest part of the story, as when I was doing my waiting outside for the mailman, I attempted to get in his way. He simply walked into me, pushing me out of the way, as though he didn't even notice I was there, or feel me running into himself. I recall on Friday going into my closet. I had 5 instances of this set now, and I hadn't opened any of them. When I had finished my schoolwork for the day, I set about assembling all 5 of them by the instructions, but I still kept all but one of them in my closet. I also vividly remember taking a large curving set of white pieces on the prongs near the front of the tank and sticking them together. Over the weekend I came down with chicken pox. The following weeks at school were rather busy, and I recall rather vividly being frustrated with how little free time that I had, and I had missed a lot of sleep due to my memory being worse. I think it was 2 weekends later on a Sunday evening that I was playing in my room with all the duplicate tanks out. I specifically remember having them all arrayed in a wedge triangle, going against an AT-AT and some mock vehicles. My mom came into my room delivering to me some fresh laundry, and she asked how I had gotten 5 duplicates of the same set. I still felt guilty or nervous about the situation. Or maybe it was just because my mother had walked in on me, a 7th grader, badly voicing 2 Lego clone troopers arguing about whether or not battle droids used the restroom. Juvenile and immature for a 7th grader. I know. For whatever reason, I made up a pathetically blatant lie about there having been a mix-up at Christmas, and I got the same set from a bunch of different people. Surprisingly, she seemed to take it, being a bit confused at my desire to accumulate and hoard sets rather than collect unique ones. I recall one of the tanks getting displayed on my shelf, which had a rotating display of other Star Wars vehicles and minifigures, and the occasional mock on display. The other 4 stayed in my closet. I took them out a few times, getting less nervous and uptight about the whole situation over time. It was a good thing after all. What kid wouldn't want more toys? I think I had them for about 2 months. Shortly after Christmas of that year, I think it was December 27th or 28th, I had several of my friends over, some that I hadn't seen in a long time, and I spent a lot of time playing Chromehounds with them, but some of them got into my room and played around with my Lego sets. Most of my friends were mature enough as to not needlessly break my Lego builds, but I would find a few sets had missing pieces or repairs needed on them when all my friends would go home. At some point during those days, I had a friend come downstairs while I was in the middle of a match, and ask me why I had so many instances of the same set. Focused more on the match, I didn't have the mental capacity to divert into fabricating a story, so I mumbled out the truth to them. Got them a couple of months ago. Weird mix-up with the mailman. Gave me one each day for a week. He seemed to take that in stride and headed back upstairs while I finished the game. Later, a day or 2 later, I went upstairs. My friends had gone home, and I had to tidy up my room for New Year's. I would find them missing, with only the one on my shelf mostly in one piece. My mind immediately went to the thought that someone had stolen them, probably the friend who had asked me about them in the first place, who had decided to capitalize on my good luck. I didn't go to my parents, as I had never told them about the week where I had gotten 5 sets and the strange mailman, so I knew they wouldn't understand what I was talking about. I went to my friends, trying to visit all of their houses to see if I could find the instances of the set there, but to no avail. I tended to do pretty thorough searches, though I later came to realize if someone really walked out of our house with enough Lego to build 4 Republic fighter tanks in their back pocket, somebody, a parent or relative or another friend, would have noticed. Most of my other friends had long since outgrown Lego. Funny how kids that age like to act like they're all grown up and don't need toys anymore, but spend hours upon hours playing with yours. About a year later, I asked my mom about the whole thing, as she had seen me have all 5 of them, and I came clean to her about the details of everything that had happened when I was suspended. She seemed pretty clueless as to what I was talking about, and attempted to justify it as the sets had probably just come apart when the kids were playing, and were mixed in with a loose bin of Legos in my room. I tried to explain to her that wasn't the case, and I would need specific pieces to rebuild them, and I probably would have it if it were the case. After all, when a Lego set gets broken, it rarely gets broken back down into individual pieces, unless someone is deliberately deconstructing it. If that had been the case, there would have been chunks of incomplete models in my bin of loose Legos that had been cleaned up by her or someone else. Anyways, I've been moving house recently, and I found a copy of the instruction manual for set 7679 while going through a folder of my old schoolwork from around the time. I also have one complete model sitting on my shelf to this day, constantly reminding me of this occurrence. I have some theories surrounding this incident, and some of the others surrounding it. I do wholeheartedly believe that we are living our lives in some sort of computer simulation, but I'll have to save those for a later post. Two. Exactly 3 weeks ago, I was in a pretty nasty car accident. My case is still open, so I can't really give much detail into it, but everything has been feeling off. It's pretty much been a series of unfortunate events. These events have not been impacted to my injuries. These events I have had no control over. I did not have a concussion or anything like that, so it's not my brain just making this up. Everyone at the scene, the paramedics, the doctors in the hospital, and everyone I showed pictures of my totaled car to were in shock that I wasn't hurt worse. Of course, I'm still in a good amount of pain from it, but everyone thought I should have had more injuries. It looked like I should have died from the accident, but here I am. Here's where things start to get a little weird. A few days after my accident, my mom told me my grandma had just been in a car accident. Nothing bad, just a little bump from behind. The next week, my neighbor tells me on her husband's way home from work, a metal pipe came flying at his car out of nowhere. He was okay, but his windshield was completely shattered. Then last week, my coworker got into a car accident. Someone bumped her from behind. She hit her head on the steering wheel, but that was about it. She has a headache, but was able to recover quickly. A couple other random, but important things to note. Number 1. Ever since my accident, there have been a lot of birds in my front yard. They never came around like this before. They're pretty small, but I've counted 27 of them there at once. They also fly off whenever a car drives by, and sometimes they end up hitting the window. Don't worry, they're fine, I always check. During this time, I also had a huge cricket hit the window and stay on the windowsill staring at me. I don't know what this means, but the more weird stuff that happens, the stranger it's starting to sound. Number 2. Last week my alarm system made a beeping noise as if someone walked through the front door. It always makes this noise when the door is opened. And I thought my roommates had come home. I was washing my face in the bathroom, so I figured that's why I didn't hear the door close or anything. A couple minutes after this happened, I realized no one actually came home. I got scared and immediately called my neighbor, and she said they just heard someone on their front porch. Super freaky. Her husband and sons checked around both her house and mine, and everything was fine. We just kind of shrugged it off, but it still doesn't feel normal. Number 3, as I said, 3 weeks ago today since the accident happened, and at 5 a.m. this morning, the Santa Ana winds, which are very strong California winds, came through and left a mess. Our roof is missing a few shingles, there's debris everywhere, and a few trees were knocked down in our neighborhood. I had a chiropractor appointment at 10:30, and for some reason, when I was heading there, I had the feeling he was going to ask how I dealt with the winds, and what area I was in. Some areas got hit worse than others. So on my way over there, I figured he wouldn't know exactly what streets were around me. So I was thinking of landmarks and buildings that he would know to get an idea of where I'm living. So during my appointment, he actually asked me where I lived, and I had to describe it to him by landmarks and buildings. Sorry this is so long, but I'm having this feeling that everything is just a little bit off, and that I'm not supposed to be here. After reading all these Matrix stories, I'm starting to believe that maybe I did die from that car accident, but was somehow transported into a different Matrix where things are a little different. Or maybe I was supposed to die in the accident, but somehow things glitched and my body wasn't impacted as much as it should have been. I'm trying to wrap my head around all this stuff that's been happening lately. It's very strange that these things are all happening in the same time frame. Any ideas? 3. Recently, a row of trees appeared in front of a cemetery only a 5-minute walk from my home. To give proper context, I have been living there for about 6 years. I have to pass this cemetery daily, as it's the easiest way to get to the downtown area where I work, and also the freeway that will take you anywhere else, basically. There's a mausoleum over there that has a gate in front of it, and directly parallel to it is a historical cemetery with large tombstones, which isn't typically that common where I live. Usually it's just those plates in the ground with the name and a short description. Unimportant, but who knows, maybe it is. But in front of these gates, to my memory, there had always been just brown dirt. Nothing really growing out of it. I'd remember walking every day since I was in school, or working, or just walking to go buy a pack of cigarettes. That walking in front of the cemetery and mausoleum, I have never had to walk around anything. Flat and dry it was indeed. This is how I remembered it for the last 6 years. But to be honest, it's such a mundane detail that I never thought about it because it'd only make up 3 minutes of my 15-minute walks to wherever. But this is where it gets a bit odd. I should have mentioned this earlier in the post, but directly behind my home there's a very popular hiking trail which is in a mountain. It's not very tall, but it's historic. There were supposedly natives that lived on that land or near it, but if you try and find any information on it, you'll come up dry. Many people describe esoteric or paranormal, as they put it, things occurring. So one morning, me and my girlfriend take our 2 dogs on a walk up the mountain. Mind you, very strange things with the weather had happened, like completely unexpected rain with strange electricity movements. There was someone the other day running through my street, screaming about worshipping and some other stuff I couldn't make out. But I minded my business. This day that we decided to walk our dogs, the wind speed was intense. In fact, so strong that it caused both of my neighbor's front tree branches to just snap off. And these branches were pretty large. The wind felt strong enough to actively push me off balance. But as we're going up and reaching the midpoint of our walk, we get a good view of the whole town, including the cemetery. And that's when we both saw the row of fully grown palm trees, now on the flat, dry dirt that rested in front of the gates. Initially, I wouldn't have noticed, but my girlfriend said those trees weren't there before. With that statement, my mind started playing back the countless times I walked past, where those palm trees were, and I had absolutely no recollection of them existing. I began to psych myself out a little, asking myself if I had just never paid attention. But I quickly realized that it was impossible. How'd I never notice when I remember walking on top of the land that they now were planted on? Once we said this out loud, the wind strength amplified, and we began to head home. To make sure I wasn't acting a little crazy, I did my research. First I checked Google Maps Street View and, yep, palm trees. But they looked a lot younger. I also looked for photos taken by people online, and I couldn't find any just on someone's phone or something. But the one I did find was professionally taken from inside the cemetery, and showed the palm trees from 2006. After consulting with other locals and family, the answers were either, "Yeah, I entirely don't remember trees being there," or "I'm not sure." And I think that a row of tall, fully grown palm trees on a street you have to go down every day are too hard not to take solid notice of. I believe I may have witnessed a dimension change, if you will. But I believe there is another layer involved with the mountain, especially considering the strange behavior I saw, and the strange weather that is nothing like I was familiar with. Not to mention that the previous day there were people in suits, in nice new cars patrolling around the mountain and cemetery. I knew they were patrolling because I had a good excuse to watch them drive around, and they were driving around the same corners and parked in the same areas. It felt straight out of Twin Peaks or something. But hey, weird, right? 4. I have an older sister, as well as a brother that is older than both of us, and she is married and lives about 3 hours away from where me and the rest of the family live. So in 2009 or 2010, I was dating a girl that I ended up marrying. and I had just graduated college, so I was living with my parents until I found a job and got my own place. She would come stay at their house on the weekends with me, and she always packed a duffel bag for clothes and belongings. This one Saturday we had woke up and had a full day planned. We were going to the furniture store to pick out a couch, and then we had planned on going to the movies with my parents and dinner afterwards. We were both getting dressed, and I noticed she was leaning down getting stuff out of her bag that was located in my closet. When I heard her say, "What in the world?" I walked over, looked down, and there was this ring laying there in the bottom of her duffel bag by itself. I thought this was odd. But I said, "When did you get that?" She goes, "That is not mine. I'm not sure whose ring this is." I shrugged, didn't think nothing much of it, and then said, "Put it on. It is pretty." She picked it up, put it on, and it fit her finger perfectly. We didn't think anything else of it and carried on with our day. Later that evening, we were at the movie theater, and my sister had texted me and was asking about the movie we were watching while we were waiting for the movie to begin. We were chit-chatting through text, and I told her about my girlfriend finding the ring in her bag. My sister then asked for me to get her a picture. Curious to see what it looked like, and I obliged. Several minutes go by, and I looked down and noticed my phone was flashing and that I had an incoming call from my sister. I answered the phone, and I was like, "Hello?" On the other end, I heard silence for a second, followed by sniffing, and then my sister's broken voice asking, "Where did you find it?" She was obviously crying, and I was completely confused because I wasn't sure why. I responded, "What do you mean, the ring? We found it in the bottom of my girlfriend's bag at the house while we were getting ready this morning." She went completely silent, and then after a few minutes she goes, "There's no way, that's not possible. Let me call you back later, enjoy the movie." When we got off the phone, I was completely confused, but wasn't sure what else to think or say, so we watched our movie, had dinner, and forgot about it. After I got off the phone, my sister called me back and explained why she had acted so strange. She proceeded to tell me that the ring was her wedding band, and it had been missing for well over a year. Additionally, she knew it was her ring because it had a small bend and crease on one side of the ring where she had smashed it one time. It also had an engraving on the inside. This is strange enough in and of itself, but it gets even better. She told me she lost this ring in Charlotte at their home 3 hours away after taking her rings off and setting them on the counter next to the toilet. And after she had flushed, she slipped and hit the rings, and this band fell in the toilet while in the middle of flushing. She said that moment stands out to her because she remembers the sound of the band hitting the porcelain of the toilet. She had been emotional about it for a long time, knowing that she had accidentally flushed her wedding band down the toilet, but hadn't told anyone because it was kind of embarrassing. What makes this even more strange, my girlfriend wasn't even in the picture at the time her ring went missing. I was in college the year before and had never even met her. I met her after I graduated and moved home, so there is no way she could have retrieved this ring. The last piece of the story that gets even more interesting. My sister and my brother-in-law were going through a very rough patch in their marriage at this time. My sister suffered from infertility and was not able to give her husband a child. They were close to divorce and had been discussing it the day that I spoke to her on the phone when she called me after seeing the picture of the ring I sent her. She looks back at that moment and attributes that to being the kickstart to repairing their marriage. They are still happily married and adopted a child 5 years ago. I still to this day have no explanation for how this was even possible. This universe is incredible. 5. A few years ago, I was at home and my parents were over. With my husband being away, I was feeling pretty bummed. However, it helped to have my folks over, especially as my amazing mum made some yummy food for me that day. It was a Saturday, so I had spent a few hours on Netflix and thought I needed a bit of a break. Can't remember what show I was binge-watching, but it was something half interesting. I think it was around 10 p.m. and I was getting a little tired. My dog was sitting next to me on the lazy boy sofa, and without causing her too much of a bother, I decided to get up and stretch my legs. It was a clear night, and I stood by my French doors looking up at the sky. Something inside me made me feel like I should step outside to get a clearer view of the sky. You know, it really isn't often for us to have crispy clear skies where I live, mostly because it rains quite a bit, or is just a bit cloudy or too cold to go outside. As it was a late summer's night, I thought to myself, why not? I love stargazing, so I grab a blanket and my sun lounger, set it all up with my back to the French door. I lay down for a while and just stare at the beautiful stars and wonder what the cosmos has to offer. There is so much that we don't know about. I am not sure what time it is, but the warmth of the blanket and cool summer air made me sleepy. I think I even nodded off for a few minutes. After a while, I wake up and decide to head back in. I open the door and to my surprise, there's my husband sitting on the same spot I was with my dog and watching TV. I am shocked and gasp. I ask him what he's doing home. I thought he was out on boys' holiday. How and when did he get back home? He just gives me a confused look and says, "What are you on about? I've been at home all day." The trip isn't happening till next week. At this moment, I am super confused. My head starts feeling a bit funny, so I pick my dog up and sit next to my husband. We spent another few minutes talking about how I spent the day at home chilling because he was out, and that my mum made me a nice dinner. He just laughs it all off, and I'm totally freaked out. Did I just imagine it all? Like, what the fuck? How is this even possible? My inner self is scared and confused, but there's also another part of me that thought maybe I was just having a very vivid dream. I look at the clock above the TV and note that it was 10 p.m. again. How did that happen, I wonder? "So you're sure the trip is taking place next week and not today?" "Yes, baby, I'm pretty sure." He replies sarcastically. I go into the kitchen and expect to see my mum there, but she wasn't. I check the fridge to see if we have any leftovers, and lo and behold, there in the fridge are some leftovers from our dinner. Now I am laughing and thinking to myself that my husband has somehow managed to pull a great prank on me. He must have changed the clocks after coming home. Maybe his flight was cancelled. I now have a full grin on my face and I'm ready to confront him. I take the leftovers with me and rush to the living room, ready to attack. I walk in and freeze. The TV was on Netflix like I left it when I went out. The dog was sitting on her side of the sofa as she was before I went out, and my husband was nowhere in sight. Panic and fear seize my body for a good few minutes before I open the French doors and check if my husband is hiding outside. Unsurprisingly, everything is as I left it. The sun lounger is right outside the door, and no husband in sight. Like a 5-year-old that has woken up from a bad dream, I scream for my mum. She comes rushing downstairs and I explain what had happened. She assures me that my husband hadn't returned, and that I must have somehow imagined it all. I ask if Dad is okay, and she reassures me that he's been sleeping for well over an hour. The clock above the TV says it's 11 p.m. My head starts pounding, and I just go up to bed and pull the duvet over my head. Maybe I will wake up and realize it was all just a dream. I don't think I imagined the whole thing. I physically moved from room to room, went outside, stargazed, and came back. How on earth can I say that it was a dream? My only explanation is that I must have somehow traveled to a different dimension where my husband was at home. What do you think? Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Glitch in the Matrix Stories number 84. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use and sent in stories for use in this video. Before I move on, I have a little bit of a shout out to give. Oh yes, well, they've got 2 YouTube channels, so it's either Blogger Mummy or Mrs. Retro B. I'll link both of them in the description. I'm not sure which one they actually wanted me to shout out. They didn't specify. So, that's the author of the final story there, and you can head on over and check out their channels. See if there's anything there that interests you. I believe one of them's a narration channel, and the other one, I'm assuming, is called Blogger Mummy. It must be about blog stuff and mummies. Okay, and with that I'm going to head off for now, so until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.